Return of the King indeed, folks. King of the Hill Season 14 is finally here, a mere 16 years after To Sirloin with Love aired on Fox. I presume that all of you have binged the entire season already, as it's our first ever binge release for King of the Hill, but my plan is actually to go through these episodes one by one with these video breakdowns, of course starting with the Season 14 premiere, Return of the King. And there is lots to go over since this one is more or less a pilot for this new aged up version of the show, so let's dive into it. And hey, if you like this breakdown, not only will I be releasing one for every single episode of the season over the next couple of weeks, but over on my Patreon, I'll be posting my uncut reaction videos to my first time watching each episode. If that piques your interest, basically when I post the new episode breakdown on this channel, I'll simultaneously post my reaction video to that episode on my Patreon. Check it out if you're interested, and thanks for the support. Alright, I cannot believe we're talking about new King of the Hill in 2025, but there's a ton to go over here in this premiere. This episode basically has the tallest task of the bunch. It has to not only reintroduce us to these characters all these years later, but establish where they are in their lives, where they've been over the past 8 years, and also present us with the new premise / hook for the series. It's arguably harder than a typical pilot because the viewer isn't going in with as blank a slate, and there's a longer list of characters and aspects of the revival to address than if they were just presenting us with a whole new series. And I do think you can feel a bit of the strain to achieve all of this in one episode. It kind of feels like the reacquainting has to take priority over the story here, and I do think that they accomplished that reacquainting. But at first, I felt like the story and dilemma was maybe a tad undercooked since it had to take a back seat, though I may have come around on it. Let's talk about it. I really loved how most of this episode played out, even if I initially felt like the dilemma and resolution finished a little abruptly. The episode starts with Hank trying to pee on his flight back to Texas and struggling immensely.
Initial descent into Dallas-Fort Worth.
Occupied!
This was always such a funny delivery, which we heard back in Season 3 when Hank had to get a sperm sample for the fertility doctor.
Busy! Occupied! Occupied!
This season has quite a few callbacks overall, and while some maybe feel a little tryhard, I think stuff like this works great. It's just a funny Hank delivery in any context. Some people wouldn't even know it's a callback, and that's why it still works here. I am a little bit on the fence about some of these first jokes from Peggy. Obviously, Peggy oversharing and embarrassing Hank is a big part of the show and a great source of comedy. But man, the level of oversharing about Hank's urethra to a plane full of strangers maybe felt a tad excessive.
The doctors say he now has the urethra of a 7-month-old.
But this is partially because this scene is a little bit expository, with Peggy using the oversharing as an opportunity to catch the audience up to speed with where they've been. But the episode does do a great job pretty immediately setting up the series dilemma. Hank is obviously so ecstatic to be back in Texas, but the episode immediately starts showcasing Hank's confusion with all of the changes that have occurred in his absence, starting with how the Dallas-Fort Worth airport now looks like a shopping mall.
What? Are we still in Amsterdam?
And this is basically the crux of Hank's issue in this episode. The full-on culture shock after missing out on the previous 8 years of change while living in the more insulated, frozen-in-time company town at the Aramco base. Every single thing is a bit of a struggle for Hank. He has no idea what boba is, he doesn't really understand how Uber works, he tries to give the driver his ID, he has absolutely no idea which bathroom he's supposed to use in the restaurant, he is shocked that his friend who stayed at his house would leave him information about solar panels.
Solar panels? What other religious propaganda did they leave?
And yeah, it can kind of feel like this episode is just running down a checklist of modern issues for Hank to be upset about, but that's the point. These are all things that the people in Arlen are just used to by now. But Hank missed these changes over the last 8 years, and he's being confronted by them all at once. It is simply meant to be a bombardment of change for Hank. They do a good job establishing the new status quo here, which more or less is the old status quo, but with the added caveat that now Hank is even less familiar with some of the more drastic changes in modern society. And I think what's most important about this setup is just how thoroughly it stands to push Hank out of his comfort zone. Previously, the environment in Arlen was more or less in support of his worldview, and often the drama and conflict stemmed from other people or ideas sort of entering or infiltrating into Hank's space and world. And yeah, he would often learn something from those experiences, but here, The place that was previously Hank's safe space, that fostered his worldview, is itself throwing him curveballs left and right. I also love that they showcase that Hank's issues are less anger over ideology and more, I find this inconvenient and confusing. Hank's mostly just annoyed by all gender restrooms because he has no idea which one he's supposed to use. It's a world he thought he understood, but now he doesn't even know where to pee. Even just the town's new infrastructure, the bike lanes, the lane dividers, the traffic signs, they completely mess up his commute home and prevent him turning into the alley that he's turned into every day for most of his life.
That's an extra mile of driving anytime we come home from anywhere to the south. Green my ass.
And it's not just the world that's changed in those 8 years, but also Hank has to come to the realization that his friends have gone through changes as well. And I think the show does a great job not changing these characters fundamentally, but still allowing them to have gone through changes in their lives. Dale is still Dale, but since Hank left, he briefly became mayor, though briefly is absolutely the key word here. But it showcases that while previously Dale's beliefs were super fringe, and he was kind of just this outlier, kooky friend, at least some of the world has started conforming to his type of belief system, even if he technically only won 9% of the vote. During the pandemic, Boomhauer actually got into a serious relationship and now basically has a stepson, though we actually never see his girlfriend in the body of the show, and in the intro sequence where we do see her, she's wearing these huge aviator sunglasses and a massive mask. It makes me wonder if the joke is just going to be that we never see her, which is kind of a funny gimmick. Pair someone you never see with a character you can never understand. But Boomhauer doesn't feel like a different character. Yeah, he's not a ladies' man anymore, but now we just get to see him in this new period of his life, full-on dad mode. I also gotta give them credit for the incredible fake out with Nancy and John Redcorn, or at least what I think is a fake out. A lot of people were obviously really worried based on the new intro sequence that Nancy and John Redcorn had gotten back together, even after she broke it off with him in the original series. But it seems as though they're really just working together professionally as co-hosts slash real estate agents hosting the show Selling Arlen.
It was Dale's idea.
Again, a really fun subversion, an interesting way to keep Nancy and John Redcorn in each other's lives without continuing the affair. And then there's Bill, and honestly, Bill's trajectory here sadly makes a little too much sense. Post Hank and Peggy leaving and through the pandemic, Bill has gone into recluse overdrive. Probably the least surprising reveal of the entire revival, to be honest. But I think that even when this trajectory makes so much sense for Bill, being confronted by this jarring change is a lot for Hank to handle. This episode obviously has to do a lot of table setting for the new series, and though it does feel to me like the sort of reacquainting slash catch-up supersedes the story at hand, I actually think they do a pretty great job incorporating that catch-up into Hank and Peggy's little arc in this one. Showcasing all of their friends in these new places in life are just more brands of change that make them uncomfortable and less stable with their life in Arlen. They anticipated returning to their home and safe space, only to find that in many ways, Arlen had continued moving forward without them. And the episode explains why this is even more jarring for them by showcasing exactly what Hank and Peggy's lives are like working in propane on the Aramco base in Saudi Arabia. As the creators spelled out in interviews, these bases are these little Americanized company towns. They're sheltered, insulated, and basically just look like your classic white picket fence American dream suburb. They are far more frozen in time than Arlen itself, and Hank and Peggy were able to fully engulf themselves in the exact lifestyle they were used to back in Arlen, but with Arlen having moved on, now they're the ones who have to catch up, and their entire journey in this episode is about recognizing what is actually important to them. But before we explain how this all wraps up, let's talk about Bobby. Bobby's side of this new series is really where the show gets to spread its wings into new territory, and also explore the character growth that I think the fans will be most eager to see. Obviously, Hank and Peggy are in a new stage in life, but their new stage is not as drastically different as Bobby's, and it is undoubtedly more exciting to see the trajectory of a character who previously we only knew as a kid or teenager. And I think they've chosen a really interesting life path for Bobby here. Obviously, back in the original series, Bobby showed a real interest in two major things: comedy and food. His initial goal was to become a prop comic and pursue comedy, but later in the show, he found that he had a major talent for cooking in numerous different ways. I think having Bobby be the chef at a Robata restaurant is a pretty cool middle ground here. We basically see that he has to entertain and host using the charm and charisma from his comedy chops chops, while also preparing delicious and unique meals with his cooking chops. I also think having Bobby forgo college to run this restaurant puts him in a really unique position. The show could have easily turned into a college set comedy for half of the runtime, but instead we get a great mix of workplace sitcom and young adult dilemmas for Bobby, Joseph, and Connie, plus a little bit of that college stuff for good measure. One other little detail that I particularly loved was how they sort of subtly put Bobby in a really similar work situation as Hank had back in the original series. Obviously back then, Hank was the perpetual assistant manager of Strickland. He was the glue that kept the company together, he did most of the important work, but he was never quite given the credit he deserved. In the revival, we learn that Bobby is the one running Robota Chain, and that his quote-unquote partner, Chain Wasanasong, is really only the money man. He doesn't do any actual work, despite his name being on the business. And Bobby, in turn, is a bit of an overwhelmed workaholic. Like Hank before him, Bobby is the engine that keeps the business running, despite that business bearing the name of a less deserving man. Honestly, pretty ingenious. It's a very similar scenario without being too on the nose identical. It allows for similar themes and messages without outright repeating stories, and through his new life experience, it can allow Bobby to appreciate what his dad has already gone through. There's a lot of potential here. Bobby's work-focused life does mean that he has a bit less time for socializing, but I like that they immediately show he's still capable of having a social life. One of the first things we see Bobby do is impress and entertain a group of college kids at his restaurant, and I think the show was really smart to maintain that Bobby's wit, charm, charisma, and general social aptitude shines through to adulthood. He really hits it off with these kids, and they even invite him to a frat party where he further impresses everyone with his cooking and social skills.
I'm going. Come join. You're like really cool.
Okay. I maybe just will.
I genuinely love Bobby's delivery here. He's so smooth. He really is charming. And I love that the writers just immediately show Bobby is still good with women, something that was abundantly clear in the original series, as he had numerous girls show mutual interest in him. But I love that they didn't shy away from the idea that Bobby would absolutely get around in young adulthood. But they also make sure to seed that while Bobby is good with women, he's also maybe looking for something more than that. After his hookup, he probes interest in hanging out some more, and she basically just says, no, this was a one-time thing. And Bobby plays it cool, to his credit. I really like young adult Bobby. This leads to his reunion with Connie, and I guess if I had any real nitpick about this repilot, it is a tiny bit convenient and coincidental that Hank and Peggy's return to Texas perfectly coincides with Bobby reconnecting with Connie for the first time in years. We're made to understand that Bobby has been back in Texas for a while longer than Hank or Peggy, and to me, it's a bit surprising that he didn't look up or reconnect with Connie of his own volition, particularly when he is apparently roommates with Joseph. I feel like there would have at least been some probing, but again, this is a nitpick. I do think we know why Connie didn't reach out to Bobby, despite knowing about his restaurant. She hints that she was seeing her friend on campus, and based on the fact that we learn who this friend is later, I think it tracks that she might feel weird about reconnecting with Bobby through that friend. I'm trying to keep spoilers to the individual episodes I'm talking about, despite knowing you all probably binged this already, but I'll keep it at that. I think besides the arc that Hank and Peggy go on in this episode, the other thing it does really well is basically set the stage for the more serialized elements we see in Bobby's story. Basically, anything in Bobby's life that's career or romance based. This is one of the reasons I think this revival really excels. It doesn't shy away from giving us an ongoing story with progression through Bobby's young adulthood, while it really focuses on episodic conundrums for Hank in his new place in life on the other side of things. The show slightly adapts to modern television storytelling without removing the charm of the original episodic format. It's having its cake and eating it too, really. Okay. Now let's talk about how this episode all wraps up in terms of the emotional arc. I actually really like how much their return to Arlen challenged Hank and Peggy. This coat of new paint over everything made it all feel so unfamiliar.
Look at all these reflectors. And what kind of food is poke?
Hank seeing the Oklahoma-style barbecue joint being the last straw was a really funny touch, but I think the way this all comes together in these final couple of scenes is really sweet. Basically, their return experience sort of instantly put Hank and Peggy in a place of cynicism towards what was once their home, to the point where they are fully ready to go back to their cushy lives on the Aramco base in Saudi Arabia. And you can see as they approach the Megalomart that they're doing so with these cynical attitudes. Hank Hank presumes that these Girl Scout cookies are gluten-free and are going to be bad, but they quickly realize that these are just some sweet little girls selling regular Girl Scout cookies. They're trying to raise money. I love this exchange about the Samoas. The Girl Scout cookies Hank likes are called Samoas, but the Girl Scouts tell them that they're actually called Caramel Delights now, just to be considerate of Samoan people. And I think this is really clever, because basically Hank still has his favorite cookies. They just have a slightly new name. It tells him that though there might be a new title and label, what's in the box is still exactly the same.
That's a good change.
And this is a perfect metaphor for what Hank has to learn here. Sure, the box that contains Arlen might look a little different, but the cookies on the inside of it, the people, the substance, they're still here, and they are always what made Arlen home for Hank and Peggy. And would you believe me if I told you this also works as an additional metaphor for the viewer at home? Though there might be a bit of a new look and new hook to this version of King of the Hill, the characters, the themes, the messages, they're still what they've always been. They might not be called Samoas, but they taste the same. I kinda wish this scene had maybe lingered a tiny bit longer, but it's still really lovely. Hank strikes up a conversation with a contractor over his Sawzall. He realizes that the community is still here, and of course, they remember why they can never leave Texas. And the final scene kinda shows Hank putting this belief into action. He gets his new grill up and running, and he has the neighbors over for food. Bobby comes to cook with him, and it even lures Bill out of his house finally, showing that Hank himself can actually act as an important pillar of this community. And Hank cooking and the entire neighborhood coming out to eat with him is really similar to the way the original show ended into Sirloin with Love all those years ago. And this episode ends with the first full playthrough of that brand new title sequence featuring that perfect old theme song. A great way to say the king has returned and he's here to stay. Honestly, while I did initially think you could really feel the strain in this first episode with how much it had to balance, the more I think about it, the more impressed I am with how well it set everything up, and particularly with how well they handled that little crisis of faith for Hank and Peggy. It's a really impressive return for the show, and I think the season mostly just gets better from here. So if you're gonna come along for the ride, I should have a video for season 14 episode 2, The Beer Story, up very soon. It might be tomorrow, it might be the day after, and the plan is to cover Bobby Gets Grilled shortly after that. Hopefully that means I'll have all 10 episodes covered in depth over the next couple of weeks. I'm really excited to dive into all of these. I think there is just so much to talk about, and also still so much they can do with this new series premise moving forward. There's just so much potential, and at the end of the day, it's still King of the Hill. So let me know below in the comments what you thought of Return of the King and the revival as a whole, and obviously, stay tuned for more. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.